Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Grace of a Military Child in Life podcast. Military families are not like your traditional family. They are strong, brave, resilient, and some of the most incredible people I know. My name is Gracie, a U.S. Army brat, and I am your host. I am honored to be able to give military family members like myself a place for them to share their stories and experiences in the military life. Stay tuned for this week's guest. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to a new episode of Grace of a Military Child in Life. Today, I'm here with Samantha, who is an Army wife. So, Samantha, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, tell me what it's like being a military spouse for you.
For me, it's been quite a journey. I did not grow up around the military community. I grew up in southeastern Wisconsin. My family all lived like within 20 minutes of us. We were, very close, still are very close. But that was our community, was our like immediate family.
Sure.
So very, very different from the military community. Met my husband, and he was in ROTC at the time in college. And when he commissioned, he actually went into the National Guard. We stayed in Wisconsin for the first 6 years while he was in the Minnesota National Guard. And every, probably 4 to 6 months, he'd ask me, be like, are you sure you don't want to move to Minnesota? Like driving 8 hours each way every month is a lot.
That does sound like a lot.
Yeah, granted, his family was from Minnesota, so he'd get to see like his grandparents, his aunts and things when he went up there, but It is a lot. And I was very set on staying in Wisconsin. Very much like, nope, I'm not moving. I'm not willing to go elsewhere. And I always say like, God must have just been laughing at me when he said that.
Because flash forward,
Right.
Yeah.
And like now we've literally lived across the globe. And so he just hit 12 years in. So he spent the first 6 years as National Guard. And then while he was actually deployed, they had a call to active duty for officers, which to my understanding is actually pretty rare to come up on, and to make it easier for National Guard to switch over if you're an officer. And so he said, I really want to put my packet in. I was at work at the time. I was working in hospitals as a CT and X-ray tech. So I was busy, didn't really have much time for that phone call. And I was like, you know what, just drop your packet. We'll see what happens. We'll go from there. And, it was accepted. They actually released him from his deployment like 3 months early, which is super weird and rare. So he came home, he had about 48 hours home, and then he had to go report down to Missouri as I'm still living in Wisconsin. I was like, well, we'll figure this out.
That's like the motto of military life.
Right. Like, we'll just figure it out. It's fine. So we were in Missouri for a little bit. And then after Missouri, like I said, joke's on me, because then we were in Germany.
Wow.
So this little Midwestern girl who didn't want to leave the state of Wisconsin is now flying across the world.
Listen, that's so awesome.
Yeah, it's been, we've been really, really lucky with leadership that he's had, with the people around us and the community. And we've had, honestly, quite a really good experience, which I know is not everyone's case. And then, the saying of people saying like, well, you're a military spouse, you knew what you were getting into.
Sure.
I don't think any of us really do.
Right.
But the caveat to that is that I actually did get a hand in making that decision with my husband. Like, we talked about it more than just that quick 5-minute phone call, obviously. But, actually talked about what this would mean. And, collectively, yes, it was kind of his dream and passion and his service heart, but we were able to move forward into active duty together, which is not normally the case.
Yeah.
So kind of chose it together, but, we were able to put my career first for 6 years. Now we've put his career first for the next 6 years, and just continuing from there.
Yeah, it's definitely a life where most people would look at you and say, oh, well, you signed up for this. You knew what you were getting into. You knew everything that was going to happen. But it's like, no matter what, it's like, you don't know you're packing up and moving to Germany, at the drop of a dime. And so there's so many unknowns with the life in general that it's just, you can't necessarily fully know what to expect when you're getting into it. And then having those opportunities come up that are, really rare and make it hard to pass up. It's like, okay, well, what do we do now? Where do we go from here? And some people, like you said, you don't necessarily get to always be part of that decision making. And thankfully you've been able to, but that's not the case for most families. It's just like, okay, well, you meet your spouse later in life, and you're just go along for the journey at that point and figuring it out from there. And that's what the best part of it is. Everyone's experience is so different that you never know who you're going to meet, whose paths are going to cross, and the incredible journeys that you're going to get to go on.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, and that's just it. Like after Germany, I mean, that one was being overseas. Everyone says like it's usually really hard for the few years you're over there. And it was amazing. Don't get me wrong. Like we would truthfully go back in a heartbeat. But the time that we were there, global events that were happening, and then just the job that he was in, like it was not easy for family life. Right. Just with workloads and things like that. So coming back this last 2 years now, we've been in Iowa, which is nowhere near a military base. The closest one is like over an hour and a half away. And so there's a lot of retired in our community, but there's no like active duty in our community. There's a Coast Guard like reserve unit here, and then another like Iowa National Guard reserve unit close to town. So like there's military, but not a lot of active duty, because he's been teaching now ROTC for the last 2 years. So it's been very different to go back to like the civilian life that we had been living for a while, and being like that like military connection with Guard that we had, but now obviously active, but that military connection and then civilian life being thrown back into it. And that's also come with its own challenges at this point too, because we're so used to the military community now, and civilian life is very different. I mean, there's so many like pros and cons to each one of them, truthfully, especially that we're seeing now that we've like really been on both sides of it.
Right. And once you get, you're so used to civilian life that it's great. It's everything that you could have ever imagined. And then you get exposed to the military life, and you really get to see, that active duty side of, oh, well, here's what it means to be moving every couple of years. Here's the connections that you form, those bonds that you create with other spouses, other service members, other families at, the drop of a dime. You walk in to just some random, event, and you meet your best friend, those types of relationships. And then going back to the civilian life and then trying to explain all of that too is just a whole other world. And, even having retirees around is great, but at the same point, it's not the same. What it is active
of life.
Exactly. So that was like when we moved here, my dad was reserved. So we were in Cleveland, Ohio, no base nearby. It was like 4 hours away for an Air Force base. And then we moved to Texas when he got hurt. And it's like, okay, all of these military, you really get exposed to that. And I'm trying to think of the word that can't think of the word that I'm looking for, but it's different. It's this, your perspective is completely changed. And then when you get back to the civilian life, it's like, this is great. Like, I don't know why I preferred this life over the military for so long, but it's definitely, like you said, they have their pros and cons, but then at the same point, I think it doesn't take long but until you start to miss the military community.
It has not taken long. No, we've both said that while we've been here for 2 years, it should have been 3, but he got promoted. Yay. So we're moving again.
Yay.
Actually, next week is when the trailer comes. So,
Oh my gosh.
so we're like in the middle, like most of our stuff is packed up. It's fine. But
That's living in a military house.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, we've moved a lot. This has moved 5 and 7 years now. So it's a lot. But we're very much, there's so many things that we're really looking forward to getting back to, moving to Kansas and moving back into the military community, and then to the point where we chose to live on base for the next year, because one, we're only there for a year, but also just because we want like so much of that community right around us again.
Right.
And being in our civilian world here and having to like just work so hard to build that, it's been hard and lonely and quite isolating. And I don't think either of us expected that going back to the civilian life. Cause like, I mean, we did that for so long and we had friends around us, but like thinking about it, it was the friends that we had from high school and college and all these other past experiences from life. So then you move somewhere where you don't have those connections from, childhood, and you're just the odd duck out, kind of sitting there going, well, I don't really know how to meet people now.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely something where, a lot of, you can look at it both ways. Some people love living on base and some people prefer to live like off base, right outside of base, couple miles off base, whatever it may be. And I think there's definitely pros to each of them, but I loved living on base and I will never trade those days for anything, because you just really get so immersed into that community where, like you said, your hometown people don't necessarily understand it. And, those are relationships that were formed in a different season of life. And while they're still great, they're still there. It's just, you need that community. And after being separated from it for so long, you really start to like, just want that back, that, you ready to go dive in head first, looking at it.
Yeah. And we really, really are. Yeah. It is that community aspect that, I mean, we've built some of that here in Iowa through like church and kids' friends and things like that. So like we've had good people around us, but it isn't just quite the same as someone who, you can just look at each other when the moving van pulls up and you just like you just get it.
Your neighbors are moving out and that moving truck comes in and you get new neighbors, and it's you have that instinct to just go right over and, and welcome the new neighbors.
What do you need? Like, we've got to.
Like, do you want us to help unpack boxes? We will help you. We will be over in 2 seconds.
Your favorite kitchen pot. Here's mine. Borrow it for a few weeks. I don't care.
Sure.
Yeah, exactly.
So you just have those. You have the mutual level of understanding of, this is what you need. This is what we can do for you. Because I think too, with the military community like that on base, you have been in the exact same situations. You've moved, you've lost items have been broken, items have just, and some have come back fine. And, that's great too. But, you've been in those situations that are just, they suck. That, when somebody else is in that situation and, not everybody copes with things the same way. Not everybody has the same mechanisms to deal with it, but what helped you, and you're able to say, hey, like, this is what helped me during this time. Let me do this for you. When we watch the kids, let me, do a grocery trip or whatever, to be able to step in and say, let me help you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think too, it's just, like you see people more, and that sounds so weird.
Yeah.
And like, we know our neighbors here, but we never see them.
Right.
Like every once in a while you see them like as they're getting out of their car and walking into their house. But half the time, you see people, they pull into their garage, they close their garage door, and then they get out of their car. At least like that's how, most of our neighbors are here. And it's not that they're just like reserved or to themselves, and they're wonderful people and we've really enjoyed them, but I don't feel like I know them at all. Whereas like anytime we lived in a military community, and we've lived now on base and kind of just outside of base on both ends, depending on where we're at and what we
Right.
want in that season, and kids and things like that. But we've never had that before.
Yeah. It's
Where
definitely,
everyone's just like so quiet into themselves. I'm like, I hardly ever see our neighbors, and it's just kind of strange. And they're wonderful
yeah.
people, like they'll, for whatever reason, in the middle of winter, all of a sudden, like our whole sidewalk was done by our neighbor next door. And I was like, that was really, really sweet of him. I wish I would have seen him doing it so I could have gone out and like thanked him. But then I don't see him for 3 weeks. And I'm like, well, thanks for, shoveling our sidewalk way back when it snowed.
Yeah. We've actually said the same thing since moving here. We're about like 2 hours from the nearest space. And we, during hurricane season and after a storm comes through, it's like all hands on deck. We're all helping our neighbors, like trying to just get things done, move all the debris, tarp roofs that need tarped or whatever it may be. It's like all hands on deck at that point. But then we don't see our neighbors. Like you said, we see them getting in and out of their cars, wave, hi, hello, how are you? But then other than that, like, I haven't been in most of their houses. Like, I don't know what it looks like,
Yep.
But in the military, like, we were at our neighbors all the time. Like, yes, the only thing that divided us was a wall. Like, we had the joined houses.
Right.
But we were over there all the time. We did dinners. We would do, she made like she would get the tool to make tutus and stuff. So she taught my sister and I how to do that, and making bows and all kinds of stuff. So, you just have those relationships because, I mean, that's really the first person you meet when you move on base is your neighbor. And then, say a deployment comes up. Who's the first person you're going to rely on? Your neighbor. Exactly. Or who's the first person that's even going to offer a helping hand is your neighbor. Like, oh, here, I made some extra dinner. Here's, and they might stay with you and might eat dinner with you. And they might just say, hey, I know you need some space, but here's some food because I know you probably haven't eaten. So,
right, exactly.
They just understand to that level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's definitely something that we're looking forward to. Again, when we were in Germany, we lived on like this little cul-de-sac part of the neighborhood on base, and like everyone just we'd all have like our garage doors open, the kids would be out playing, we'd all be sitting in our driveways just chatting, and even that, like, it wasn't anything big, it was just decompressing and talking and doing life together. It wasn't grand or spectacular or anything like super special, but I think like that piece of just doing life together is something that is so sometimes so missed, like in the civilian world. When you have people over, everyone's cleaning their house and making sure that everything's perfect, and they've got all this food and all these, everything's put away in the house and everything like that. And they probably come over to our house and I'm like, I didn't vacuum this week. Like, that's just how this week happened. But you're welcome to come in and eat all my food and help yourself to water or whatever you want. And like, come hang out. Like, my house is always open for that, but I'm not gonna, like, it's clean on a daily basis. Like, we don't, clean frequently because I have 2 small children and a dog. Like, we're always cleaning this house. But other than that,
some things
like,
just get
I'm not
left
gonna do things like super special because that's just not who I am. I want people to meet me where I'm at because that's what I'm going to do for them. And, if they can't, I guess at that point, accept me as me, then we move on, and that's okay too,
Yeah.
And I think that like coming into my own self too is something that has really blossomed with being associated with the military and stuff. Because even when my husband was National Guard and deployed, they had, their family readiness group and all that kind of stuff, but they were 8 hours away in Minnesota. Sure. And I was still living, 10 minutes from my parents in southeastern Wisconsin. So like geographically, we weren't close. Like, I don't think that I probably talked to any of those spouses more than maybe once in the time that he was deployed, just because like I wasn't right there. I wasn't a part of those events because I wasn't gonna drive up there unfortunately, to be part of them.
Right.
And he was gone, so I just worked all the time basically.
Yeah. Which is
um,
understandable.
yeah. We didn't have kids at that point, so life looked much, much different than it does now. But
Right.
yeah, like it was finding myself too through that. And I think that the military has really helped me just realize that like there's people who are gonna like me for me, and
Right.
I can just be myself. And you don't have to sit there and try to change every little thing, or make sure that you're prim and proper on the outside, and
Yeah.
hiding everything that might be just like happening in life. Like you can have people that will do life with you even if it's a mess sometimes, because life isn't always going to be this lovely little fairy tale. It's going to have lots of challenges that come up too, but that doesn't mean that you can't thrive and have people with you during those challenges.
Right. And that's, the biggest thing that I always talk about with military life is just the community. And that's
Mm-hmm.
really what makes this life what it is, because you can't get through it alone. And
Mm-hmm.
there's some days
Yeah.
that are going to be hard and that are going to be fantastic. You're going to get both ends of the spectrum. But you really begin to learn so much about yourself. And it might not be in that moment that you're like crying on the couch that you're learning about yourself. It's those moments afterwards where you can look back and reflect, and it's like, oh, well, I did this because I like this to be this way, and that and whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
But you just learn so much about yourself through this lifestyle because you're forced to do things. Like you said, you
Mm-hmm.
never really wanted to leave, Wisconsin, but
No,
you've moved
I
all
swear
around the
someone's going
globe.
to take me kicking and screaming out of that state for the longest time. And then, yeah. And it's,
Yeah,
now it's like any chance we get to travel anywhere, whether it's within the United States or, overseas or anything, like we jump at it. We travel to see family, obviously, but,
right.
we love filling our time with those experiences now. And we'd travel when I was young. And we always did like a big road trip every year. So even now, like, and my husband's family always drove everywhere they went to. So we love road trips and we don't mind a drive. Um, Thankfully, our kids have so far been really good with that. They're really young, so they're kind of just stuck with it for now.
Yeah.
But it's been really fun, and we get to really hang out and have a lot of quality family time that way too, which has been great. And
Right.
um, with the 4 days that the military gets with some of the holidays and things like that, like we just jump at those opportunities because we know that we can't take off for every little thing here and there,
Right.
and that's okay. But like if you grasp the opportunities that you have and make the most of them, then you still get to have a lot of experiences. So,
Yeah. You think, I think with the military life, you really begin to cherish every single opportunity that you get because,
yep.
You can't take off every single little moment. I remember being so heartbroken in like second grade, I think it was, because my dad was going to miss my last day of school, but he was away at school, at school himself, so it's not like he can, do all of that, but you make the most of those moments when you can. And I think
Mm-hmm.
we start to cherish those moments so much more. Like my dad got a pass to come home right before he deployed. Like I said, he was reserve, so he was deploying out of the base quite a few hours away. And so he was able to get a pass and come home. And those are the moments that we cherish because,
Mm-hmm.
it might have only been a few days, but we were able to take a little detour and go to New York City. And, we grew up on the show Cake Boss. So we were able to go to Hoboken and go to Cake Boss.
Yeah.
So those little things that, yes, the situation might suck. It might be the worst thing that you've ever been through. But if you find just some sort of glimmer of hope, some sort of positive, it's going to change your perspective of the situation that just you want to be done and over with.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that that's one of the big things that has probably changed for me. And I mean, he's been in 12 years now altogether. And so, I mean, at this rate, I think we figured a good 12 left before you can fully retire, just because the National Guard time doesn't quite add up the same as
It's
active
not
duty
active
time.
duty time.
So it's total time in its 12 years
Yeah.
so far, but we've got like a good 12 yet before we hit that 20 technically. So, but yeah, like, I mean, getting those opportunities, taking them, and completely exactly what you said, like the finding that little bit of good to be grateful for makes the, harder situations so much easier, just to not let them, take you down too much,
Right.
to get
Yeah.
through them. Yeah.
You look back and it's like, oh, I wish I would have enjoyed that just a little bit more because it's gone. And it's like moving to a new place. Like sometimes you don't necessarily want to move to, whatever base you're going to, whatever installation, and you get there and then you just hate every second of being there. And then you leave and it's like, oh, well, I missed that thing. I missed that. I wish I would have done that. I wish I would have enjoyed that a little bit more. And so you get this list of I wish, I wish, I wish. And I think that's something you learn very quickly in military life, especially as more moves happen and deployments and trainings and whatever. You learn to just appreciate those little moments because they're not going to be around for forever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I mean, we've been to certainly one base that most people would probably say that they don't like in the Army. For him, it's the home of his regiment. So like, it's like chances are we'll be going back there at some point too. Like, and it's not really an if, it's a when, and that's too. But that was our first base right after he went active duty. And honestly, like we had the most positive experience.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is the people that we met.
Right.
It's the friends that we made there. It's the people that were like, hey, yeah, you are kind of new to this. Like he's, been in guard, but it's a totally different ball game going to active duty. So like being, that green spouse who just has really no idea what's going on.
Right.
But having people, come up and kind of hold your hand and show you around and get you through it and be like, hey, I was there once. Like you're good,
Yeah.
and I think that the people is just like, that's what makes it so worthwhile in the end, worth all the challenges and all the hard, and then to just get you through it all.
Yeah. And like you were saying earlier, like this is just the most like least judgmental, community that you will ever find, because we've been in those situations where we just didn't have the energy to vacuum the house, and you can't walk in and say, oh, we're not living in the barracks where we're doing, room checks and, inspecting for cleanliness. We're trying to get by any way we can. And that might not be being the most spotless house on base. And everyone will have their chance to, be every single level of, military life and whatever, things that you experience. But it's just, you have to go with the flow. You have to put yourself out there in the times that you don't want to put yourself out there, because those friends, those people that you meet will literally be with you until the day you die, or the day that you're like, okay, I'm done. Like, I mean, you choose, but they will be with you no matter what. They will be holding your hand through every single situation, whether they've been through it or not. They're encouraging you, trying to uplift you and figure out what you're doing and what they're doing, because nobody knows what they're doing in this life either. So you're all just trying to learn together.
Yeah. And the minute you figure it out, something else is going to change.
That is beyond true, because why would we keep things, in an orderly fashion when we can throw in little plot twists?
Yeah.
Yes. So the last thing I want to ask you is, what advice would you give to another military spouse?
I think my biggest advice would be to keep an open mind and an open heart, especially if you're newer to being a military spouse. I have tried a lot of different, organizations that are on posts. There's some that I've fallen absolutely in love with. And for me, basically, we've moved, like I said, a lot in the last few years, and you can always try it a few times. And if you don't like it, like, you don't have to continue. You don't have to go back. If you try out one event or something that you think that you're going to like, or that a friend loves, and it's not for you, like, it's okay to find something else. And I think part of that too is just allowing that time. Because a lot of those organizations, thankfully, are at every post. So, if you give yourself some time to find what you really enjoy about them, then you'll be able to really plug in then the next time you move and have even more community just right there, right away for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that, because you really have to find what works for you. What works for one person is not going to work for the next. And there's so many different opportunities and events and everything that go on around base and in even the surrounding areas, depending on where you're at. So you really just have to put yourself out there and figure out what works for you. And if something doesn't work for you, don't get butthurt about it, because there's something else.
Exactly. Yep.
Yes. And if you're comfortable sharing, where can listeners connect with you at?
My Instagram is Happiness with Samantha. Otherwise, my website is www.happinesswithsamantha.com. So I run a blog with that, newsletters, and just try to share positive about this lifestyle and life going on around us, because I think if you live in a space of gratitude and joy, and you find those little pockets, even when things get hard, it's all going to be all right.
Yeah, because if you don't look for those positives, then it's going to be much harder. So we always need those people to help share the positive things when you can't find them too. So
yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Samantha, for being on the podcast and sharing about what it's like for you being a military spouse, and then how to be positive throughout it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Thank you for listening to Grace of a Military Child and Life podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to give it a like, follow, and comment. Also, be sure to check out Instagram and Facebook at Grace of a Military Child and Life for more awesome content. For information on the podcast, Military Child Bigs and Littles, GoAMCL blog, or other resources, visit www.goamcl.org. You can also email me at Gracie, that's GRACIE @GOAMCL.org, with any questions or comments. To be a guest on the podcast, you can schedule it at www.goamcl.org/schedule a podcast, all one word, or contact me via social media or email. Stay tuned for the next episode where another incredible story is shared.